Ronald Araujo left for Liverpool despite having a €1 billion release clause. He was Barcelona's second captain and had just renewed his contract until 2031. The club's president, Joan Laporta, had publicly said he would renew him for life. At one point, for all Barça fans, he was the leader of the defense of the future, the man around whom Barça was going to be built for the next decade. Araujo was simply untouchable. But suddenly, something changed, and that same man would end up leaving Barça through the back door, on loan to Liverpool. How could Barça's second captain go from untouchable to leaving on loan in a matter of months? Why did Barça let Ronald Araujo go? What was the reason for his failure? Those are the questions, and the answers aren't simple. I started investigating, pulled the thread, and what I found was much more than a football story. I was simply blown away. Because in Araujo's downfall, there are many very tough episodes that very few people know about and that deserve to be told. But before telling you about his fall from grace, I have to tell you how his rise happened. Welcome to Venom Stories. Ribera, a city in northern Uruguay, right on the border with Brazil. So much so that the main street separates the two countries and you can cross from one to the other just by taking a walk. There, on March 7, 1999, Ronald Federico Araujo da Silva was born into a humble family with Brazilian roots. His father, Celestino, worked hard to keep the household going. His mother, Karina, sold fried pastries to help with expenses. Ronald was the oldest of three brothers, the one leading the way with two younger ones behind him, Michael and Kawan. Since he was a kid, two things defined him: football and his size, because Araujo was always big, stocky, stronger than kids his age. He played futsal and 11-a-side football, and in both, he stood out because of that stature that made him different. He trained at his hometown club, Huracán de Ribera, and something happened there that says a lot about his physical precociousness. He debuted in the senior team with grown men, being a kid of only 13. In 2015, he made the big leap. He moved to Montevideo, the capital, hundreds of kilometers from home, to sign for Club Atlético Rentistas. And that's where the transformation occurred that would change his career forever. Because Araujo, until then, wasn't a defender. He was a forward. He played up front, looking for goals. But at Rentistas, the coaches looked at that huge, powerful kid who dominated the game and made a decision. They converted him, sent him back from the attack to the defense, and he ended up fitting like a glove. He made his professional debut for Rentistas in the Uruguayan second division in 2016 at 17, and he did so well that it didn't take long for him to catch the eye of a bigger club. In July 2017, Club Atlético Boston River paid about €395,000 to secure his services. With Boston River, he even played in international competition, the Copa Sudamericana, at just 18, testing himself against rivals from all over the continent. Araujo was starting to climb the ladder fast, one step after another, and European scouts combing South America in search of the next gem started noting down his name. Barcelona was the team that moved the fastest, and while he grew as a footballer, he also strengthened something that would accompany him throughout his life and that years later would play a role in his toughest moments: his faith. Araujo was, and is, a practicing evangelical Christian, a deeply religious man who shares his faith openly, who celebrates goals by pointing to the sky, who talks about God in his interviews with total naturalness. That faith, those roots, that coming from the bottom, from a home where his mother sold fried pastries to make ends meet, forged a kid with an apparent strength that seemed proof against anything. A tough guy, the kind who doesn't break. Or at least, that's how it seemed, because football had a few blows in store for him that neither his stature nor his faith could fully cushion. But that was years away, and we'll get to that. First, he had to get to Barcelona, and as soon as he arrived, they sent him off the pitch. It was October 6, 2019, at the Camp Nou. Barça was winning 4-0 against Sevilla, and in the 72nd minute, Ernesto Valverde decided to bring on a centre-back from the reserve team, a 20-year-old Uruguayan kid, to get his first minutes with the first team. He came onto the pitch, replacing precisely a teammate he was competing with for the future, whom we'll talk about shortly. And 15 minutes later, in the 87th, Ronald Araujo committed a foul on Chicharito Hernandez as the last man, and the referee showed him a straight red card. His debut with Barça lasted 14 minutes and ended with a red card. He was the 14th La Masia Academy player Valverde gave a debut to, and certainly the one who had the most eventful start. Araujo had signed for Barça B on August 29, 2018 for 5 seasons, in a transfer of about €4.5 million from Boston River. And the club, already sensing what they had on their hands, set a release clause of $100 million, which shot up to $200 if he was promoted to the first team. In the reserve team, under García Pimienta, he became one of the captains, a leader standing out for something uncommon. He was a colossus in the air. The kid seemed to have, and did have, the qualities to achieve something great. The rival I mentioned earlier, whom he was competing with for a spot, was named Jean-Claire Todibo. Todibo was a French centre-back born in Cayenne, French Guiana, in December 1999, just a few months younger than the Uruguayan. He had arrived at Barça for free in January 2019 from Toulouse as a personal bet by then sporting director Eric Vidal. And he didn't arrive as just another player. He arrived with a huge reputation. Lothar Matthäus himself, the German legend and Ballon d'Or winner, had said of him that he was the best centre-back he had seen in a long time. The club's plan was clear on paper. Todibo was going to be the fourth centre-back behind the three untouchables, Piqué, Lenglet, and Umtiti. And Araujo, the kid from the reserve team, was supposed to be a step below, waiting for his chance in Barça B. But football isn't played on paper. In the 2019 preseason, during the tour of Japan, Valverde tested both young centre-backs and was pleased with both. The club, having just lost the bidding war for De Ligt, the Dutch centre-back who went to Juventus for a fortune, decided not to spend more in the market and look inward, toward those two kids they had at home. And both, in theory, had a place, but only one was going to win the coach's trust. And here came the turning point. Valverde said that the player who proved to be subscribed to Venom's stories and left a like on the videos would stay in the first team. Well, that's a joke, he didn't say that, but it would be very nice if you did. What did happen was the following. In a match against Leganés, Valverde made a firm decision. He left Todibo out of the squad and instead put Araujo, the reserve team kid, on the bench. Todibo ended up watching the match from the stands while the Uruguayan made the first team squad. In the offices, the club was already valuing Todibo's transfer at around 10 million. Abidal's personal bet was being outperformed inside the dressing room by an academy graduate in whom no one had invested so much money or focus. The final outcome came in January 2020. With Valverde on the verge of being sacked, Todibo packed his bags and went on loan to German side Schalke 04. The situation was clear. Todibo was definitely behind Araujo. Araujo had won the war and was also about to become something that no one, even in their wildest dreams, would have imagined for a kid converted from forward to centre-back in the Uruguayan second division, an untouchable for Football Club Barcelona. Quique Setién was the first to give him a starting spot. In 2020, with the Asturian coach already on the bench after Valverde's departure, Araujo started against Mallorca, partnering Gerard Piqué in the center of defense and relegating none other than Umtiti, a World Cup winner with France who had been struggling with physical issues, to the bench. The reserve team kid was no longer a surprise waiting for his turn. He was a reality taking the place of established players. From then on, his progress was unstoppable. Season after season, coach after coach. Under Ronald Koeman, he established himself, was registered with the first team, scored his first goal on December 19, 2020 against Valencia, and lifted his first title, the Copa del Rey. Under Xavi Hernandez, he completely exploded. In his third season as a first-team player, he surpassed 3,000 minutes, scored 4 goals, and showed a versatility that everyone loved. Because when the team needed it, Araujo sacrificed himself and played as a right-back without complaining, plugging holes and giving everything for the badge. He had become one of the best young defenders in Europe. A lightning-fast centre-back, dominant in the box, practically a wall. And the club moved to secure him, though it wasn't easy. In April 2022, Araujo renewed his contract until June 30th, 2026, with a release clause of 1 billion euros. But the negotiation had been on the verge of collapsing. The offer the club put on the table was far from what mid to high-tier players in the squad were earning, and his agents had better financial offers from abroad, especially one from Manchester United. Until then, Araujo had one of the lowest salaries in the entire dressing room, despite already being an undisputed starter. He could have gone to England to earn much more, and yet, it was the player's own decision, wanting to stay at Barça over the money, that broke the deadlock in the negotiation and tied him to the club. They say Luis Suarez himself told Araujo that it was very cold outside of Barça and that the best thing he could do was stay. In any case, that gesture of prioritizing Barça over a bigger offer earned him huge credit in the dressing room and in the hearts of the fans. In the 2023 preseason, he joined the captaincy group by vote of his teammates, wearing the third armband behind only Sergi Roberto and Ter Stegen. He was officially one of the team's leaders, and President Joan Laporta praised him to the skies. At the premiere of a documentary about the player himself, Laporta went so far as to say that he would renew Araujo for life. There is no greater declaration of love a president can make to a footballer. And while establishing himself at Barça, Araujo had also become a fixture for his national team. He played in the 2021 Copa America, was a key piece in Uruguay's qualification for Qatar 2022, although an injury limited him in that World Cup, and in the 2024 Copa America, held in the United States, he started every match, partnering Jose Maria Jimenez as Uruguay reached the semi-finals of the tournament. He was both a leader at his club and an undisputed starter for his country, a footballer completely established in the football elite. Araujo, at that moment, was at the top. He was untouchable, captain, a starter for his club and his country, with a 1 billion clause that told all of Europe that no one was moving him from there. Nothing suggested a fall. And yet, the first crack had already opened. It opened on a Champions League night against Paris Saint-Germain and would be made public months later through the mouth of one of the best coaches in the world in the most unexpected place, in a documentary. It was April 2024, the Champions League quarter-finals, Barça against Paris Saint-Germain at the Olympic Stadium because the Camp Nou was undergoing renovations. Barça dreamed of reaching the semi-finals. In the 12th minute, Rafinha scored and made it 4-2 on aggregate. Barça had the qualification at their fingertips, they were leading the tie, they had a foot and a half in the semi-finals. And then, everything went wrong. And it went wrong because of Ronald Araujo. Because Araujo was sent off for stopping a clear goal-scoring opportunity, leaving Barça with 10 men for practically the whole match. And with an extra man, Paris Saint-Germain did what the big teams do. They scored 3 goals, completed the comeback, and knocked Barça out. In other words, Barça went from touching the semi-finals to being out, with the Uruguayan singled out as the culprit, as the man with the red card that changed everything. The criticism was brutal, so brutal that Araujo and his family even reconsidered whether they wanted to keep living in Barcelona. But the red card, serious as it was, wasn't the worst part. The worst came months later, and it didn't come from an opponent on the pitch, but from a screen, because the coach of that PSG was Luis Enrique Martinez, the Asturian, who was also a former Barça man. Well, months after that tie, Movistar premiered a documentary about him, about his day-to-day life, about how he prepared for matches. One of those all-access pieces that show the inner workings of an elite coach. And in one of the scenes, Luis Enrique appeared preparing precisely for that duel against Barça, explaining his plan to his coaching staff, and he dropped the phrase that would become a heavy burden. He said that Araujo was a top player, but that he had trouble playing the ball out from the back, and that every time the Uruguayan received the ball, they would block a passing lane to stay in the game. In other words, Luis Enrique confessed in front of a camera that he had designed his match plan to repeatedly attack Araujo's build-up play, that he wasn't worried at all about Araujo having the ball, and that all they had to do was wait for him to receive it to hurt Barça. In other words, he had identified his weak point with surgical precision and had exploited it thoroughly. And here comes what really did damage and what I discovered while investigating. Within the club itself, that tie and, above all, what the documentary later revealed, are pointed to as the true beginning of Araujo's downward spiral. More than the red card itself, what marked him was that phrase, that public label spoken by one of the best coaches in the world, recorded forever in a documentary watched by half the planet. It's one thing for rival fans to chant something at you from the stands that is forgotten in a week. It's quite another for a coach of Luis Enrique's stature, with recognized authority, to dissect your weakness in an audiovisual product that goes down in history. From then on, every time Araujo received the ball in the build-up, half the stadium held its breath. Opponents pressed him more fiercely, and doubt that didn't exist before, began to settle in his head and in everyone else's. The cruelest part of the matter is that Araujo had never been anywhere near a bad defender. He was fast, won his duels, dominated the box, and was a generation-defining center-back in the classic aspects of the position. But modern football also demanded him to be a playmaker, a footballer who built from the back with the ball at his feet. And that aspect, the least natural for him, was the one Luis Enrique had put under the spotlight. In a sport where perception rules as much as reality, being exposed in that aspect and by that voice was a media sentence very difficult to overcome. But what came next was even worse. And here is the most baffling part of the whole story, what is truly hard to understand. Because one would think that with that public label on him, with that doubt sown by Luis Enrique, the club would start to doubt him. Well, the exact opposite happened. In January 2025, months after that tie and with the documentary already out, Barça did the exact opposite of pushing him aside. They secured him even more. After a winter in which he was on the verge of leaving for Juventus, who pursued him very strongly, Araujo chose Barça again and signed a new renewal, this time until 2031. Upon signing, he looked ecstatic. He said he was very happy, spoke of a dream come true, thanked the support received, and predicted many successes to come. The club was betting on him long-term, against the label, against the doubts, and until 2031. And that bet, that blind faith in the captain, made what came next even harder to believe. Because Araujo's next mistake came exactly a year later, in another semi-final against an Italian opponent. And this time, Araujo could no longer get back up. It was May 2025, in the Champions League semi-finals, and Barça was facing Inter Milan. It was a back-and-forth tie, the kind remembered for many years. Barça, now with Hansi on the bench, was ahead, touching the final again, and Araujo came off the bench in the final stretch to help secure the qualification. But he didn't secure it, rather the exact opposite. Because in the final minutes, Inter completed an agonizing comeback with 2 late goals, and Araujo was involved in both. In the most painful one, he allowed Francesco Acerbi, an Inter centre-back, a defender of almost 37, who had gone up to attack in a last desperate attempt to finish a low cross that sent the tie to extra time. A centre-back finishing like a forward in Barca's box, with Araujo nearby, unable to prevent it. Inter ended up winning the tie, and Barca was once again left at the gates of the final. And once again, Araujo's name was in the center of the target. This time, his coach came out to defend him in public. Hansi declared that Araujo wasn't the only one who had made a mistake that night, sharing the responsibility, trying to take the pressure off the Uruguayan. But the coach's words couldn't cover up a reality seen on the pitch, match after match, which connected directly with Luis Enrique's phrase. Araujo had a lot of trouble adapting to Flick's style, and that style was precisely the worst possible for his weaknesses. Because Flick's Barca played with an extremely high, advanced, aggressive defensive line based on the offside trap and defending very far from their own goal. A system that demands three things from centre-backs: speed to recover, millimetric precision in positioning for the offside trap, and a clean, brave build-up from the back. And those were precisely the aspects Araujo struggled with. A centre-back who was very fast, dominated duels, yes, but was very uncomfortable in a system that asked him to read the game and not just run and fight. The problem worsened, moreover, because while Araujo struggled with that system, there were other defenders in the squad who excelled at it. For example, Pau Cubarsí. The veteran Íñigo Martínez also stood out. With his experience and left foot, he provided that build-up play and positioning that Flick demanded. Both performed better than Araujo in exactly the areas where the Uruguayan faltered. To them was also added Gerard Martín, who also earned minutes in the center and ended up moving ahead of the Uruguayan. The numbers from that season confirmed it mercilessly. Araujo gradually lost prominence, chained bench appearances, and his participation was reduced to sporadic outings, many of them from the bench. And in football, when there are teammates who do what the coach asks better than you, the hierarchy starts to change. No matter how much you are the second captain, no matter how big your clause is, and no matter how much the president said he would renew you for life. The reality is that Araujo was gradually ceasing to be indispensable, and everything finally blew up one November night in London. It was November 25th, 2025. Stamford Bridge. Chelsea faced Barca in a Champions League match. Araujo wore the captain's armband that night, and that night, everything broke. In the first half, the referee showed him a yellow card for protesting a decision. 12 minutes later, close to halftime, Araujo made a hard tackle on Cucurella and saw his second yellow, and with it, the red. Barca was left with 10 men even before reaching halftime and ended up losing 3-0. Araujo walked off the Stamford Bridge pitch with his head bowed, leaving his team short-handed for over an hour. What happened in the following days was simply overwhelming. Araujo disappeared, he wasn't seen in training, missed matches, and the official explanations kept changing. First, there was talk of a stomach virus. Then, when the absence stretched to a second consecutive match, Flick spoke to journalists about a private matter and asked for the situation to be respected. And what was happening, according to what leaked in the media, was a medical diagnosis. The diagnosis published was reactive anxiety disorder, the immediate trigger of which had been the sending off at Stamford Bridge, although, according to the same sources, the causes went back much further. It wasn't just the red card, it was the accumulation. Araujo himself would explain it later in his own words, and it's worth reproducing them exactly as he said them, because they are those of a man who was asking for help. He said he didn't consider that sending off as something so serious in itself, but that it was an accumulation of things, that maybe for more than a year and a half he hadn't been feeling well, that you try to be strong, maybe because of your roots, where you come from, but that he just didn't feel well, and not just in sports, and that there was a moment when it clicked, and he said to himself, something is happening, I need to raise my hand and ask for help. Araujo raised his hand, communicated first to his coaching staff and then to the club that he wasn't in the psychological condition to play football, and Barca without hesitation granted him the leave he requested. In December 2025, Barca's second captain stepped away from the team to take care of his mental health, and as a deeply religious man, he decided to undertake a trip to Israel, to the sacred places of his faith, to Jerusalem, to find himself again and seek the stability he had lost. The Uruguayan national team, his country, published a public message of support. "We are with you, Ronald," they wrote. But the reality is that when he returned, weeks later, feeling better and intending to reintegrate, he found that his place in the team simply no longer existed. Hansi Flick was clear with him. He told him that if he stayed at Barca that season, he wasn't going to get many minutes. It was a direct message, the kind that leaves no room for interpretation. The coach wasn't counting on him like before. He had left him behind. It's true it was due to a mental health issue, but deep down, he had left him behind. And that's how he lived the second half of that season in the background, coming on occasionally, watching from the bench as Cubarsí, Eric Garcia, and the others held up the defense while the team fought for titles with another center-back pairing. It was a long and silent journey through the desert, the kind that wears a footballer down inside more than any injury. With that outlook, Araujo put himself on the market, and the offers came. Inter and Atletico de Madrid wanted him. two top-level destinations for a centre-back of his status. But he chose the Premier League, and here is the most important nuance of the whole operation, the one that must be highlighted to fully understand what happened, because it wasn't Barca who kicked Araujo out through the back door. According to journalists who follow the club's day-to-day life, it was Araujo himself who pushed for his departure. Fabrizio Romano confirmed it as a personal decision by the footballer, who felt that leaving was best for Barca and for his own career. A man who, after hitting rock bottom, took control of his destiny and decided for himself where he wanted to be. The deal was closed with Liverpool, a verbal agreement between the two clubs approved by Deco, Barca's sporting director. A one-season loan with a non-mandatory purchase option, and with Liverpool taking care of 100% of the player's salary. The amount of that purchase option is said to be around 55 million euros. For Barca, who had preferred a direct transfer with money up front, what finally convinced them was the salary savings, a critical factor for a club choked by registration and financial fair play issues. Getting rid of one of the high salaries in the squad was, in their situation, almost as valuable as a transfer. And what awaited him in England wasn't just any place, but a project tailored to him. At Liverpool, a move had occurred that opened the door wide for him. Centre-back Ibrahima Konate had left on a free transfer to Real Madrid, leaving a gap in the heart of the defense. The Reds' new project, led from the bench by Andoni Iraola, was looking for exactly a profile like his, a fast, strong, recovering centre-back, a defender who fights for every ball, to partner with the best centre-back in the world, Virgil van Dijk. His direct style, his dominance in the air, and that strength he had since he was a kid in Rivera fit perfectly with the intensity of the Premier League. And from the Premier League, precisely, Rodri left to sign for Barca after betraying Real Madrid. And if you want to know why he did it and how Barca secured his signing, click on the video appearing on screen.